Hi everyone. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Just bear with me. I'm letting people in. This might take a while because yeah, there's people logging on a lot. So yeah, just bear with me a bit. I've muted everyone, and I'm afraid to say that I've abused my power by making it so that none of you can unmute yourselves. I feel like an absolute monster for doing that, but like I'm sure you get it, like the sensory thing of if you ever hosted one of these things or been in a meeting with one of these things, and there's always one person that doesn't realize that they're unmuted. Do you know what I mean? And they're just kind of pottering about and like I don't know, talking to their spouse or talking to the dog or something, and they don't know that we can hear them. So yeah, I just these days I just mute everyone, even though it feels a bit mean, just because it avoids all of that. On a smaller scale thing, if they're only like, if you're doing one of my Kahoo courses or something like that, we all have it on all the time. We're not muted on those. But in something like this, where we've got nearly 100 people on, it's the only way. It really is. Okay, just a bit of information then about the whole thing. I am going to try and do the full hour, but full disclosure, I have had yet again quite a bad headache today. I've been out of action for the majority of the day. I had to cancel some stuff, and it's okay now, but it's not great. So I'm gonna do my best to get through the full hour. But if I just kind of say, "Hey, I've got to go," then that will be why. But hopefully it won't come to that. I'm hoping that I will make it through. Um, what else? What else? I'm recording. I always like to record these. I will put it on YouTube eventually when I get round to it, when I remember to, which could be any time between tomorrow and sometime in 2026. So if you missed part of it, or if you are here now watching the recording because you couldn't make it on the evening, then hello, this is the recording. Hope you're well. Otherwise, it probably won't affect any of you a huge amount. The fact that it's being recorded. Bear it in mind, though, if we do manage to do Q&A at the end, which we might, if I'm up to it. Do bear in mind that will be recorded too. So if you don't want to be on my YouTube channel, then bear that in mind. I mean, if it came to it, if you did pop up and ask a question and you wanted it removed, I could edit it out. You just have to let me know. That's fine. Um, it would probably postpone me putting them on YouTube because it's like an extra layer of complexity, which puts me off doing stuff because ADHD and all that. But I can do that, so it's not the end of the world by any stretch. Okay, we've got people from all over, it seems, Finland and Malaysia, which are two countries that are relatively distant to one another. So that's nice. I, of course, am going to Australia next Wednesday. I set out on Wednesday afternoon and I arrive on Friday morning, which seems to me to be a ludicrous concept. I've never traveled anywhere that takes days before. Um, so that's going to be weird. But obviously, coming back takes much less time because you basically do some time travel, don't you? So yeah, we're still letting people in. I'm sorry, I'm just kind of bumbling through. This is what I get, you see, for upping the amount of people to 300. I have got something from New Zealand. That's even further. In fact, I don't think we can get much further away than New Zealand, can we? Oh, Sleaford. Oh, yes. That's relatively close. Yeah, I mean Fiji, Micronesia, Tonga, Samoa, those kind of countries, I think might be slightly further away than New Zealand, but I'm not sure, to be quite honest with you. But yeah, hello everybody. I do actually quite like it when people put where they're from because I'm a geography nerd and it's just interesting to me. Beeston. I've got friends that live near Beeston. I know Beeston very well. That's nice. What else have we got? Loughborough. Well, I went to university in Loughborough, so that's good. Um, Scotland. Chippenham. Oh, I know Chippenham pretty well. Excellent, excellent. Bristol. I lived in Bristol for years. Doncaster. I went to Doncaster a lot recently. I feel like I've been to Doncaster a lot. Never been to Andover. Is this all this is going to be tonight? Because I've got a bad headache, and all I'm doing is just retorting to people saying where they're from. If that's if that's all we're going to get, that's all we're going to get. Warsaw. Nice. I've never been to Poland. Never been to Poland. Oh yeah, the chat's gone. Merseyside. Never been to Liverpool, actually, would you believe? I'm going week after Australia. I'm doing a talk at, is it Lipa? Paul McCartney's college that he set up, the performing arts place. So I'm really looking forward to that because I get to go to Liverpool and check it out and poke around a bit. Okay, anyway, that's enough of me. That's enough of that. Let's try and get started because, like I say, I might not make the full hour. Thank you very much to everybody for coming along to this. This is the latest in a series of free talks that I've put on for various aspects of neurodivergence. Obviously, mostly around autism because that's my specialist subject, I suppose. We're going to be talking about alexithymia today. I think. I hope I've got that right. And the impact that alexithymia can have, what it is, obviously, because you don't necessarily know, and that's fine. We don't get taught this stuff at school. We don't get taught this. You don't even get taught it if you're, training to be a teacher or training to be a doctor a lot of the time. So what hope has anyone normal got? So I'll be going over that. I'll be giving examples from, I guess, my own life more than anything because that's what I do best. And yeah, I'll do it for as long as I can. Just to, I may as well plug stuff because you know I am trying to make a living here. I've got a few other talks coming up. If you are wanting to do more online stuff like this, then I'll just share that screen again that I had on. Bear with me. Where was it? Here we are. So I've got them there. They're just sort of there. So 3rd of August, that's this Sunday, I'm doing a little short talk, drumming up interest in this Kahoo training that I am paired up with Awesome Training with. Awesome Training are an Irish outfit who are really, really good at what they do. And Kahoo is a training course designed for parents of autistic children who might not know what they're doing, which is something I can relate to very heavily. So the idea is that it helps parents understand how to parent autistically, in a way that is maybe more nurturing to autistic kids. The idea of it is, just so you get the idea of it, it's a train. I'm training people who are going to become trainers. So basically, you think to yourself, do I want to offer this training? Maybe you're already a trainer and you want to add something to your portfolio, or you want to start out and start training people on this stuff. Kahoo's a good place to start. It's fully written, it's off the shelf. You just run with it. I will walk you through it and how to deliver it and all that kind of malarkey. But then you'll go off into the world and you'll find people that want to be trained and you will train them. So it's really good. So if you want to come along to that, that's on Sunday. That's free, obviously. I mean, the actual thing isn't, sadly, but the taster session is free. Then on the 17th of September, I'm doing a one that's more designed for workplaces, so people that might have employees, people that team lead, that kind of thing. I figured that I do a lot of talks for big companies and big corporations, who can afford to have an external speaker in, but there are lots of businesses that can't really afford to do that, or at least can't do it easily because they only have a very small staff or something like that. So I figured this might be a way to help those people. So it's going to be a 2-hour talk where I will basically talk about what I talk about when I go into these companies, and talk about recruitment and how to make your workspace more neurodivergent friendly, that kind of thing. And that's a 2-hour thing on the 17th of September, and that's, I think, 20 quid a ticket, I think, if I remember rightly. So yeah, that's happening. And then on the 14th of October, I'm doing one of these on autism and ADHD. Okay. Big topic that might overrun slightly because it's such a big topic, and that's 2 quid a ticket, I think, like £2. So not free, but also, you know, not expensive. So hopefully, maybe some people can come along to that. That would be really nice. Right, I'm going to stop sharing the screen now. Oh, and then my books. Yeah. That's the other thing I need to try and sell. They're my books there, those two there. Just in case you're not aware of them, there they are. So that's grand. Okay. Use Eventbrite to get hold of the details of my courses there. Just search Eventbrite and my name and it'll all come up. I haven't got a link here. I mean, I could put one in the chat, but that would involve being organized and I'm not organized. So yeah, I think that's all I want to do in terms of hard sell. So there we are. Good. Okay. Right. Alexithymia. What is the story there? Right. Well, alexithymia is an interesting topic for me. One of the reasons that I decided that I wanted to do a session on this is because it kept coming up. Um, I don't necessarily mean it kept coming up externally, like, people coming to me saying, "Hey, I want to know more about this alexithymia business." So that wasn't really the case. It was more that it kept coming up in my own head. I kept finding myself having to explain it. I kept finding it relevant, if that makes sense. It just kept coming up in that way. I would be talking to an organization, or I'd be making my own video, or I would be writing my book, as I am doing at the moment, and it would just suddenly pop up as being, God, yeah, once again, alexithymia is relevant here. Once again, alexithymia really is key to understanding this particular aspect of being autistic, or whatever. And it just made me think, because I don't think everyone knows what it is. For reasons that I've already mentioned. We don't get taught this stuff. We don't get told it. Nobody explains this stuff to us at school or in any other situation. You have to kind of find the information out for yourself. I didn't really know about it until a couple of years after my diagnosis. Thinking about it, I'm fairly sure it must have been probably 3 years after diagnosis, like 2020, something like that, when I first heard about it, which I'm kind of embarrassed by, if I'm honest, but I don't think I should be, because, yeah, it's not out there. So for that reason, I wanted to address it, talk about it a bit. So what is, sorry, Lego's fallen off. Where does that go? Oh, doesn't matter. Sorry. What is alexithymia? Well, it's quite a broad thing, and it is all to do with emotion. Now, this in itself is interesting because emotion and autism are two things that go together a lot, especially in the public's understanding about what autism is. That tremendously flawed thing that exists out there, public understanding of autism. Not in a great way, not in a great space. I'm doing everything I can to try and help that, as are many other people. But yeah, I think in the public imagination, emotion and autism come together a lot. And I think most of the time they come together in a fairly negative way, i.e., do autistic people even feel emotion? You know, do autistic people have emotions? Are autistic people just robots who just go through life without feeling anything? I mean, I've said it before and I'll say it again. You learn a lot from the public's understanding of autism from Google searches. If you do the whole start typing a Google search and let it autocomplete, that can tell you a lot about the kind of things that people are looking up. And one of the main things that does come up when you do that is, can autistic people feel love? Just as an example, that is a question people are asking because they don't know. Because of this public perception, this general perception that autism and emotion don't go together. Now, obviously, I and many other autistic people who talk and write and do videos and all that kind of stuff have bent over backwards over the years to make it very clear that autistic people can be very emotional. We are very often highly emotional people, highly emotionally charged, highly empathetic, highly sensitive in many, many different ways. That is something that we try to get out there as much as possible, because it's not a healthy situation having people believe that we are lacking in emotion. That is bad. That's not gonna lead to any good places. Same with empathy. If you really do start to believe that our whole population lacks empathy, then that can lead to some very dark places indeed. So that's problematic too. But I'm always interested in, the whole concept of smoke without fire. That whole idea of there's no smoke without fire. There's always a reason for these things. Even if they're wrong, there's still something that's caused that myth, that stereotype to form, to take flight, to become popular. I am genuinely always very interested in that. It can lead down some dark avenues, don't get me wrong, because some stereotypes, of course, are enormously damaging. If we think about stereotypes to do with race, gender, sexuality, etc. So don't get me wrong, you've got to be careful. But it's still an interesting thing to explore. And alexithymia, I think, goes quite a long way to explaining, in part, where this myth comes from. Because alexithymia is a difficulty We could label it a difference if we wished, I suppose, but usually it does present as something actually that is something that we do find difficult. A difficulty in identifying, sourcing, understanding, and even feeling our own emotional state. So if you are alexithymic, then you are somebody who might struggle with your emotions. You might not know what your emotions are. There might be a significant delay in your emotion kind of arriving after something occurs. You might not be able to tell, no matter how hard you try, where your emotional state has come from, even if you can identify it. You might be able to identify it generally, very vaguely, but not with any real specificity. So, for example, you might know that you feel bad. You feel bad. You're in a bad mood. You're feeling rubbish. You're feeling down. You're feeling crappy. But you might not be able to specify beyond that. You might not be able to identify, for example, that you're actually feeling angry or betrayed or lonely or I don't know, any other number of negative emotions. And it is common in autistic people, but it is not universal by any stretch. I mean, very little is, let's face it. You could come up with any common trait or, I don't know, factor or part of being autistic, and there would be some people that don't experience that. I learned that the hard way in my early days of advocacy, where I would confidently go on Twitter back when Twitter was a thing and not a Nazi play pit, and I would say something like, oh, autistic people have sensory sensitivities, and someone would be like, well, I haven't. It's like, okay, fair enough. Yeah, which is why you do have to be careful. I think it's important to be careful. You do have to be very, very mindful of the fact that autism is a tremendously broad experience. We all have a very different daily lived experience of what it is to be autistic. And the reason why I'm particularly hot on this these days, and have been for a long time, really, including in my books, I hope anyway, is because I don't want to fuel imposter syndrome. I don't want to make people who don't experience whatever the thing is. I don't want to make them feel bad or feel like they're imposters or they're not really autistic. Do you see what I mean with that? So if you are sitting here right now as an autistic person, diagnosed or not, I mean, I don't care whether you're diagnosed or not. Personally, I have no issue with self-diagnosis of any kind. Others here might, but horses for courses. But you might be sitting here, autistic or not, thinking, well, I have complete control over my emotions. I know exactly how I feel at all times, maybe even to the point that it's quite difficult and quite distracting. Fair enough. You are probably therefore not alexithymic, but that does not mean that you're not autistic. So don't worry, don't feel kind of left out or whatever. If that is you, then bear in mind how this might help you work with other autistic people that loved ones, kids, spouses, brothers, sisters, parents, etc., etc. Somebody just put in the chat, I think I just saw it come up very briefly, about what about ADHD, and I think it's relatively safe to say that ADHD individuals do often have alexithymia too. I think it's a neurodivergent thing that occurs for lots of different neurodivergencies. I would imagine that with much else about this, we will find out far more in the coming decades about exactly how all of this works, what the underpinning things are, what the underlying things are, and indeed even neurotypical people who aren't noticeably neurodivergent in any other way. By that, what I mean is people that aren't diagnosed with anything and don't think they're neurodivergent, they could have alexithymia too. Alexithymia is not limited to neurodivergent people. Thing is, the more I say this stuff, the more I feel like terms like neurodivergent and neurotypical are just not up to scratch. Like they're just not, they're not enough. Like I increasingly feel like we're missing a bigger picture here. Like we're talking about, well, there's us and then there's them, and we're us and they're them, and there's a big difference here. Increasingly thinking, neurodiversity as a term is a good stepping stone, don't get me wrong. It's a very useful term. I'm glad that we've gone down that avenue, that it's a natural variation, etc., etc., etc. But sometimes when I say neurotypical, I find myself thinking, what the hell does that even mean? Like, is that even a thing? Really? I don't know. I don't want to get too far into that. I'm not a researcher. I'm not, somebody who's deeply involved in the cutting edge of research into this. I'm more of a communicator of what they find, you know. But it's interesting. It is really interesting, I think, how we are rapidly progressing through understanding what all of this is. You know, it's like the big question as well, you know, autism, ADHD, what's going on there? Really? Like, are they separate things? Are they different? Are they the same? Are they, as I like to say, two sides of the same coin, but we don't know what the coin is? We will probably find out sooner or later, but right now, who knows? Lots of things going on. So, alexithymia then means that we have this difficulty, a bit of a challenge with identifying how we feel or why we feel, etc. So, to give you a bit of background, then, just to kind of pad out or fill out that explanation a little bit in a maybe more relatable way, I'll just talk you through my own personal experience of alexithymia. For me personally, alexithymia manifests in a couple of different ways. I very definitely do feel emotion. Alexithymia sometimes can mean that you even struggle with that, you know, where you're very kind of, you know, your emotions can be very muted, but that's not me. I definitely do feel emotions. I am an enormously emotional being. I know that. And that's often makes it even more difficult because if you are highly emotional, but you can't work out what your emotions are, that's really tricky. That's a difficult space to be in because that is the thing I do have difficulty with. I don't know how I feel. And crucially, I don't know why I feel that way. So, for example, I might one day feel incredibly low, you know, very, very low emotional state, very down, what you might describe as sad, but it's a bit more complicated than that. And I might not recognize that of myself to the point where I might wonder what's going on with me today? Why do I feel so tired? Why do I feel so snappy or impatient? Because it doesn't occur to me immediately as it seems to for some people that it is because I am down, I am sad, I am in a low mood. It doesn't occur to me. I really have to earn that knowledge, usually with the help of somebody else kind of talking me through it. I will very rarely be able to identify the specifics of my emotional state. So, like I mentioned before, I will know that I'm feeling either good or bad, but I won't be able to nail it down any more than that. I won't be able to tell exactly what nature of good or bad I am. And it's interesting to note that you could hand me all the emotional wheels in the world, you know, like we do for autistic kids, like, hey, kids, look at all these emotions you can feel. You could hand me one of those and it would not help me at all. Just having them presented to me is of no use to me whatsoever. You know, it's not going to help me identify my mood because usually those documents don't contain that much information anyway. They're just basically a vocabulary source. You know, they're just a bank of words. And trying to identify whether I'm feeling jealous or betrayed or depressed or distraught or whatever is meaningless. I need to talk it through with somebody. And I will almost naturally, because of all of this, I will really not know why I feel that way. And that, for me, is possibly the most difficult aspect of being alexithymic. It is the not knowing what has caused this. Because I think it's safe to say that your emotional state really is, I mean, this sounds like a silly thing to say, but your emotional state really is quite a big deal. I think only an alexithymic person would say that. You know, it's so obvious, but it really is a big deal. It has a massive impact on your energy levels, on your ability to do things, on your ability to complete things, on your interpersonal relationships, on your ability to work, earn, learn, educate yourself. Everything is massively impacted by your emotional state. So if you can't identify it, you are at a disadvantage, you know, just generally in life. You know, it's going to cause you significant issues, I think. And I've certainly found that for myself, especially along the lines of interpersonal relationships. I mean, I am very much a disaster zone of, you know, kind of leaving flaming wreckage in my wake wherever I go. I am not an easy person to be around on a personal level. So just think yourselves lucky that you are, you know, just watching a Zoom call. Um, it makes everything very, very tricky. It makes everything very exhausting. Everything has an extra layer of complexity over it, which can make things very tiring indeed. So to give you an example then, let's imagine that I am indeed, as I mentioned earlier, feeling very low. So I won't be able to identify the exact nature of the lowness that I'm feeling. I therefore will not know how to help myself. And that's an important one. I will not know how to take myself out of, or just simply work through that emotional state. I understand intellectually and theoretically that that is the healthy thing that one is meant to do. You are meant to work through your emotional state, especially if it's a serious one, especially if it's a negative one, like grief or something like that. You're meant to figure it out. You're meant to work out how you are showing that, how to make things feel better, what to do to make yourself feel a little bit better every day, little glimmers and positive things that you can do for yourself. If you're alexithymic in the way that I am, for example, most of that feels pretty off the table. Like they're not open to me. I can't sit down and think to myself with any real meaning, okay, I feel rough. What shall I do about it? I have a kind of set list of general things that I tend to do whenever I'm feeling rough, like go for a walk, have a coffee, play a video game, have a lie down. But these are generic solutions to what might be very specific problems. It'd be a bit like having a very specific illness and being like, well, all I can really do is take paracetamol. And expecting anything to get better. I mean, you might strike it lucky. That might be all you need to do, but often it won't be enough, and you will find yourself not really making any headway and not really improving your situation at all. And I personally find myself in that situation an awful lot, where I am going through the motions of doing what I've always done to try and perk myself up, and it's doing nothing. And I won't know why. I won't know what even started this in the first place. What has caused me to enter this state of low mood? Or conversely, and almost as cruelly, what has caused me to enter this state of good mood? And I will give you some examples of that later because I don't want this to all be doom and gloom. I mean, I do because it is, but I do want to talk about some positive examples too. But what has brought me here? I can't get myself out of it, but equally, I don't know what caused it. So if you think about it, that creates two very distinct problems. You can't sort of cure yourself, you can't drag yourself out of it, but equally, you can't avoid it again in future because you don't know what did it. Does that make some sense? I like to compare it, and it's a fairly niche comparison that doesn't necessarily work for everybody. But I remember as a kid, I was fascinated by, I read something somewhere when I was, I don't know, 12, 13, about people who couldn't feel pain. You've probably come across this. There are various conditions that can lead to this where you just cannot register pain. And I remember even as a teenager thinking, "Oh my goodness, that's kind of sounds awesome. Imagine that." And then reading a bit further and realizing actually what a terrible, terrible thing that is. I mean, as somebody who's experienced a really bad headache for apparently no reason today, don't get me wrong, not being able to feel pain sounds good sometimes. But if we think about it for a moment, we realize that actually it's very dangerous. Pain fulfills a very distinct purpose. We feel pain as a teaching tool. We learn from pain, or at least we're meant to. That's why pain always feels fresh. That's why we never get used to pain, because on a biological level, we're always meant to take something from it, i.e., don't put your hand in that fire, or don't stare at a bright light for too long, or don't eat those weird mushrooms, or whatever. We experience pain. Don't jump off that cliff. We experience pain for a very distinct reason that's meant to help us survive. That makes a lot of sense to me. So if you don't feel pain, what happens is for these individuals, they die very young because they do not remove themselves from danger. You know, I remember that the example that I read back then all those years ago was of somebody putting their hand on a hot electric hob. You know, those things that don't look hot, so you only know they're hot by touching them or by putting your hand close to them. You know, and I could viscerally imagine, you know, somebody putting their hand on a hot hob like that, and and not taking your hand off until, you know, I don't know, presumably you smell cooking meat and you realize something's amiss. Yeah, this isn't ideal. And you know, that could cause enormous problems. You know, you've burnt your hand really badly, you got third-degree burns, gets infected, things go south from there. And I like to make the point that I think in some ways alexithymia causes a very similar problem. Just like you don't realize that the hob is causing your hand to burn, you might not realize that the situation you are in is damaging your mental health. I think as a species, or at least as a society, we still make a big divide between physical and mental health. We still act like they are two very distinct, different things. Usually, in a kind of physical health is straightforward and kind of makes sense and can be fixed with relative ease, whereas mental health is mysterious and weird and confusing and nebulous, which, I mean, you know, might have some truth behind it. But I do think sometimes it's probably quite a bad way to go about things, and that actually we do need to be able to look at cause and effect with mental health in the same way as we do with physical health. You know, if your cholesterol rises, you will experience this. Similarly, if you maintain yourself in a harmful relationship, or if you expose yourself to unpleasant situations and unpleasant people even for a prolonged period, you're going to suffer as a result of that mentally. And I think alexithymia has that impact. I feel personally that I have in the past not recognized when I am in situations that are making me unwell. Not realized that the company I'm keeping, or the work I'm engaging in, the job I have, the education I'm receiving, the space I'm in, whatever it might be, even I'm not saying that, you know, this is necessarily anyone's fault, but that they're not good for me. Then they're not good for me. That if I had a better control of my emotional state and if I knew what I was feeling, I would likely remove myself from this more readily than I have done in my actual life. And I think that that is something that still isn't spoken about much with alexithymia, that you are therefore prone to stay in situations that might damage your mental health for longer because you are not recognizing what's going on. I don't know whether this is relatable to anybody. So, you know, I'm trying to keep a bit of an eye on the chat, but it's quite difficult because, you know, it's there's a lot going on there. What I do say is the chat is open to everyone. You know, don't feel that you just got to kind of, I don't know, keep stunned. Just if it just turns into you like chatting to yourselves in the chat, that's fine by me. I'll just keep on blathering on, and you can just all, you know, help each other and find support networks and all that kind of thing. But I am seeing people coming up saying, you know, that they stayed in abusive relationships and things like that for longer than they should have done, and that's kind of what I'm getting at. It's that kind of thing, where we are less able to identify what is really causing our sadness. And you know, when you look at the rates of depression and anxiety, depression and particularly in the neurodivergent population, we know, of course, that lots of that is because of the way we're treated. Lots of that is because of our day-to-day treatment and the way, and also the way we treat ourselves too, to be honest. But how much of it is also caused by this for those who are alexithymic? I mean, I mean, this is a controversial thing to say, I would imagine, but I would, I would say that if you're alexithymic, the likelihood of becoming depressed, I'm certain, is higher, surely. If you are alexithymic, the likelihood of you developing depression must be higher. I am not familiar with any research in that area. Surprise, surprise. Both surprise, surprise, because research in that area doesn't tend to be done, but also I'm not the best researcher. You know, I'm not the best at doing that sort of things. That's not my skill set. But yeah, it would not surprise me one bit to find out that alexithymic people are more vulnerable to depression. because we cannot extricate ourselves as readily from dangerous environments that make us sad, that make us down, that make us suffer. So yeah, there we are. So that's one aspect of alexithymia that I think is really important. And as I was saying earlier, when I first started talking, much of this contributes, I think, to this myth that we are lacking in emotion. Because if you are not autistic, if you are neurotypical, whatever that means, and you meet autistic people, or you spend time with autistic people, you might spend time with alexithymic autistic people or alexithymic ADHD people, and it might just be that you spend time with alexithymic people that do not show their emotions much, or don't seem to feel them, or don't seem to react to them, or don't really seem to know what's going on with them emotionally. And I do think that to some extent that might explain that myth a little. In much the same way as the reality of autistic people perhaps struggling with cognitive empathy, i.e., knowing what to do with our empathy, knowing how to use it, might have contributed to the myth of us lacking empathy, full stop. You know how that's quite a big myth. Autistic people don't have empathy. Well, we know that we're often highly empathetic, but there is plenty of evidence to suggest we struggle with using it, showing it, making use of it with people. And therefore, that could be where that myth has come from. I don't know, maybe. So yeah, that's a big part of alexithymia. But I haven't even spoken yet about another aspect of this, which is the delay. The delay of emotion, which is something I see talked about less. Even when alexithymia comes up, I don't see the delay spoken about as much. And what I mean by that is, well, quite simply that something happens and then there is a delay before the emotional impact hits. Now, for me, this delay can last months. I'm not exaggerating with that. The delay can be extremely long before I feel the emotional impact of something that happened. Sometimes it's less time than that. Sometimes it might be hours or days. And I still, to this day, haven't figured out exactly what it is that causes the delay or why the delay is changeable. I really don't know what's going on there. But it is something that I know definitely does happen for me. Um, so, for example, let's imagine, a falling out with a friend, for example, might occur. And this has happened, I mean, God, I'm autistic, so this has happened a lot throughout my life. And sometimes, if I look back at my childhood, I remember I don't think I wrote about it in my first book, even though I did talk about a lot of personal stuff. I don't think I talked about the great falling out of 1993 or whatever it was, when kind of as one, all of my friends decided to fall out with me. For reasons that I think I now do genuinely understand. I kind of get it. I think I was a bit bossy. I think I was a bit of a control freak. I wanted to be in charge sometimes, and that probably wasn't appreciated, which is fair enough. But at the time, I had no idea what was going on. And I do remember very vividly feeling that keenly, like I felt that immediately, that feeling of loss and abandonment and loneliness. I did get that straight away. However, other times where this has happened, it has genuinely taken weeks or months for it to really hit home. Where I even like wonder myself, like, why don't I feel that bad about this? You know? And I might even misinterpret that and think, well, I don't feel bad about it, presumably because I don't care that much. Oh, okay, well, maybe that's a good thing. I've got a bit of mental strength, like this hasn't bothered me much. Okay, that might be a good thing, maybe. And I'll, bomb, go through life for a few more weeks, and then all of a sudden, ow, that was loud. All of a sudden, bang, it hits me, and I'm knocked out for a month. Low as you want, like really down about it, and it's all come, kind of crystallized and made sense to me, and in the end. And my God, this has been a feature of my entire adult life, where I don't know when the emotional hit is going to come, and
contributes to that general underlying anxiety that most autistic people experience, doesn't it? I mean, I did a what was I even doing yesterday? Oh, I did a talk on um, rejection sensitivity for sunshine support on Tuesday night or whenever it was, and I talked then a lot about how autistic people and ADHD people are often in a state of high anxiety because we don't know when the next criticism is coming. We're so used to it. It does come. We get criticized constantly, but we never quite know when it's going to hit. We're always just kind of worrying and waiting for that inevitability to come, which is incredibly stressful to experience. And I wonder whether this adds to that, where if you're alexithymic, you're kind of always waiting for that emotional hit to come. You don't know when it's going to land, and you don't know how it's going to make you feel when it does. And suddenly, out of the blue, it'll be there. Boom. And there's nothing you can do about it. Now you just got to try and work through it. But you don't know how to work through it because you're alexithymic and you've got no idea what to do with it. So it sits and squats on your chest for hours, days, weeks. And of course, all the people around you, all of the other people, whether they are neurotypical or they might be neurodivergent but not alexithymic, are watching you with curiosity or indeed watching you with dismay or even anger because they've noticed that whatever it was that happened doesn't appear to have affected you. How can that be? How dare you? How dare you not be affected by this terrible thing? Maybe a grief in the family, like losing a loved one, a grandparent dying or something like that, or the loss of a beloved pet, or I don't know, being burgled or a car accident or any of those negative things that can happen that, we would tend to have negative reactions to. And there you are, bumbling along without showing any obvious sign of emotional impact. And people can get really pissed off with that. They really can. People do not like that because, this is another one of those things that I can kind of empathize with. I can see why. I can fully understand why that might be distasteful. Having somebody in the group or somebody in the family or somebody in the house that isn't apparently feeling anything. Like, I get why that would cause a kerfuffle, arguments and problems. But what tends to be being assumed there, of course, is that you're simply not feeling it and you never will. But of course, what actually happens is eventually it crashes in after everyone else has gotten over it. And then all of a sudden you're hit with it, 6 months down the line, and everyone's completely confused because what's going on? How come you're now sad about that? That was ages ago. I don't know how relatable this is, but I've heard from a number of autistic alexithymic people, for example, who have certainly experienced this with grief. Losing a loved one, losing a grandparent, losing a parent, anybody, losing a friend, where your experience of grief does not match other people's expectations, and you are kind of othered and alienated as a result of that, which can be very, very painful indeed. I've speculated in the past about specifically autistic patterns of grief. I know that for my own experience, my grief pattern, because I've lost a lot of people. I've lost a lot of, I'm one of those people that had a lot of great aunts and uncles. There were a lot of people inhabiting that layer of my family tree. And then, so between, 2000 and 2015, we lost pretty much all of them one way or another because they were all in their 80s, 90s, even a few, late 90s. So, one by one, they left, this plateau of existence. And yeah, that was rough for all involved. But my experience of each one of those moments of grief, each one of those causes of grief, was that I would underreact initially compared to everybody else. But then eventually, over time, I would turn out to be overreacting compared to everybody else, which made me realize that what I think was going on was I like to display things as graphs, as some of you might be aware who follow me on social media. I like a good graph. And I have drawn a graph of this. I haven't got it available to me now, which is annoying. But I think if I was to log my grief pattern, it would be a pretty much flat line. Not flat as in at zero, but flat like at 50. If it's like a scale of 0 to 100, it would be flat at 50 from the very beginning all the way through my entire life. Whereas I think most other people's patterns of grief would spike highly at the beginning and then gradually over time tail off as time does its thing of healing. To the point where after 10 years, 20 years, maybe it's gone right down to 10 or even 5, as you've kind of gotten over your grief. Whereas for me, it feels like it's never changed. My experience of grief for all of those loved ones has never changed. I feel exactly the same now about the loss of my granddad as I did in 2000 when he first died. I can say that with certainty. I feel exactly the same. Like whenever I'm up in Leicestershire and I visit, and I go to the cemetery, which isn't as often as I'd like because I live in the southwest, and Colville's not exactly a becoming place to visit. It's not exactly a tourist hotspot. But whenever I do find myself there, I'll go to the cemetery and I'll visit the grave, and all that kind of thing. And every time I feel exactly the same. Now, I don't want to suggest that this is a unique way of feeling grief. Maybe this is how everyone feels grief. I don't know, but I've heard enough from other neurodivergent people about their experience of grief being sufficiently different that they have been attacked for it. Not physically, but like treated badly as a result of it. Family members not getting them and being upset with them for whatever reason. And I wonder whether this is why. And I wonder whether this is part of alexithymia or whether, in the unique case of grief, whether it's simply an autistic thing. Something about the way our brains work mean that grief persists forever. I don't know. There's a kind of there's an emotional layer to that, I think, which is quite interesting. Whether we literally just feel grief differently, I simply don't know. But it's an interesting thing to consider and to speculate upon. So long as we make it clear that's what we're doing, we are simply speculating. So yeah, that's my experience of alexithymia. That, my God, it's 10. How is it 10 to 8 already? Sorry. That is my experience of alexithymia. The delay being particularly important. To me, I think the delay is something that's really something that has caused many, many big problems. But I did say earlier that I wanted to talk a little bit about alexithymia with positive emotions, because I don't think we should let that go. I don't think we should ignore that, because for me, certainly, I get alexithymia with positive emotions just as much as I do with negative. So what I mean by that, for example, is, well, the best example I have around this really is birth of your child and being given a book deal. They were both, big deals for me. They were both really positive moments in my life. And I can say again with pretty much certainty that again in both instances, firstly, I know I didn't feel them the way that other people did, and I know I didn't display my emotions the way people expected me to. Secondly, I definitely got that same delay. Definitely. In that it, any feelings of pride or positivity or relief or just kind of being happy with myself or being happy with other people came late along in the day, came much later than it probably should have done as far as other people are concerned. And also, of course, in the unique case of positive emotions as opposed to negative emotions, I also know that they are very fleeting, unlike my negative emotions, which tend to hang around. So I spend much of my life, like I think a lot of neurodivergent people do, desperately trying to chase positive emotions, wondering where they came from when they do stop by, and then lamenting the fact that they've gone again and not knowing how to get them back. It's something that I think may be more closely related to being depressed than it is to being autistic, but I don't know. It might be a bit of both. It might be, who knows? it's again, it's a very complex set of circumstances. But I do feel. Look, the most recent example of this for me was I went to Ireland not that long ago, back in April, to speak at a conference, and I've never been to Ireland before. And I do like traveling. I am a little unusual in that regard. I know a lot of autistic people find travel incredibly difficult. I think my ADHD side takes over with travel, and I enjoy the novelty of it. Like going to Australia next week. I can't wait to see the stars from the southern hemisphere. I can't wait to see the Pacific Ocean. I can't wait to be on one of those really big planes. That's all new to me, and I'm excited about it and terrified in equal measure. But I was in Ireland and I was enjoying myself, being somewhere new, being somewhere that was both new but also weirdly familiar. Ireland is a strange place in that regard because obviously it's been heavily influenced by our culture for a variety of reasons. So let's just put it like that, shall we? Colonialism. But I was walking down the street and there was like a Boots, like a Boots shop. And it's like, oh, wow. And everything's in English and obviously Gaelic. And, I felt very much at home and I really liked it there. And I'm looking forward to going back in October. But I had a moment in a bar, and I think I'm being very stereotypical here because I think it actually was Temple Bar itself. I just ended up in the actual Temple Bar pub, and I had a pint. I was doing the stereotyped tourist thing to the nth degree. I had a pint of Guinness in the biggest tourist trap in Dublin, listening to them playing, you know, um, just amazing music, and I actually felt happy. Now, anyone that knows me personally, which might not be anyone here, will know that I don't tend to feel that emotion. That is not a familiar emotion for me. I don't tend to feel content. I don't tend to feel relaxed. I don't tend to feel good. Most of the time, I'm feeling pretty crappy, one way or the other, whether it's pain or mental health or whatever. For me, that feeling of like, oh my word, I'm feeling pretty good is really rare. But I had it in this moment. I think they were playing a cover of Dreams by the Cranberries at that point, which probably does help. And my, it was interesting to me because it cut through the general fog of depression. Anyone that's experienced depression will know how it can feel like a fog that weighs you down, just takes over. But it cut through that. And for a half an hour of startling clarity, I felt, I guess, like I kind of used to feel when I was younger, before the depression kind of sank its claws in, and kind of took over. I felt like, wow, like, whoa, I remember this, feeling relatively easygoing and kind of chilled out and wow. But what the point I'm trying to make is I recognized it immediately. Unusually, my alexithymic self recognized it immediately that I was feeling good. But here's the kicker. I didn't know what it was that caused that. Was it Ireland? Was it Dublin? Was it Guinness? Was it music? Was it the weather? Was it the people? I didn't know. I still don't know. I have got absolutely no insight whatsoever into precisely what triggered that feeling of positivity. And what I did afterwards, because I'm at this point in my life, I now know about this stuff. What followed on my return to home was the process of trying to identify what caused it. So, so I went on a bit of an experimentation. So I tried some Guinness just at home. That didn't work. That wasn't enough, and that made me feel quite good because at least that meant it wasn't just the alcohol. I wouldn't. I don't want it to just be alcohol. That's depressing. I would like it to be something a bit more wholesome than that, and it wasn't that. Was it the music? Well, I tried listening to some of that type of music at home. It did help a bit, but then there was a folk festival in the town that I live in, and I went along to that just on my own, like I do. So go everywhere on my own, and just sat with all these people around me. And it gradually, very slowly dawned on me that I actually liked being around people. And that was something of a revelation for me because I hate people, or at least I thought I did. like many autistic people, I am terrified of people. I find people exhausting. I find them dangerous. I find them tiresome. I find them sources of, they're going to criticize me, or they're going to mock me, or they're going to do this, that, or the other. I'm generally frightened of people. I don't make friends easily. I haven't got a huge circle of friends. And I've believed this about myself since childhood. I'd always viewed myself as being a solitary individual, somebody who liked to be alone. I've always kind of dreamed of, like retiring to a highland island somewhere, where I can sit in a little crofter's cottage and feel sorry for myself, with a bottle of whiskey and a Nintendo Switch, and that's me. That's me done. But what I learned in that folk festival was that actually, yeah, I think I'm right in saying that I don't necessarily like to socialize directly. I still think that's true because it's too exhausting for me. So, for example, I don't necessarily like to spend time going out with loads of people. But if I can find myself in a situation where I'm around a lot of people, but on my own, but just kind of absorbing their positive vibes in that emotional sponge way that many of us have, empathetically drawing in their energy. If I can find myself in that situation, I've discovered that might be the secret. So I just need to find situations where I can be around people, but also alone. And that potentially could be the secret. I'm talking about this simply because it was that process of elimination, that long drawn out process of having to really work to identify what's actually going on there, that I think is quite useful. And that I'm quite happy that I've experienced, because I've learned something about myself that I think is paradoxically the opposite of what I thought. Like I would never have come to that conclusion like casually, because I've always been so firm in my belief that I'm very antisocial. But it turns out I'm actually really sociable, so long as I don't actually have to get involved with the socializing. I just want to sit there and take it in. And that's now what I try and do. So what I'll do, when I haven't got my daughter, like every other week, and I've, got my evenings to myself, I might pop down the pub or just something like that, or go for a bite to eat by myself and just absorb. Going to positive, places where people are happy. I don't want to go to like a dingy pub where everyone's grumpy, like Moe's Bar in The Simpsons. I want to go somewhere where there's going to be like people having a good time. People are going to be chatting and lively and not too busy because of the sensory thing, but a general atmosphere of, liveliness and people going about their business. And it turns out that that does me a lot of good. And like, who knew? I mean, if you've read my books, this would probably come as a surprise, just as much as it has for me, because I think my books drip in this general sense of, like Scrooge, like anti-human, misanthropic. But then, I think to myself, what have I made myself a life doing? Well, for a long time I taught, surrounding myself with, lively, happy kids that, are filled with that life that they have and curiosity and all that energy that they have. Maybe that's how I got through teaching, because I absorbed that from them, and got something positive out of them. And now, of course, I spend my time going around meeting people and doing talks for people and, going to group events and conferences. And, that brings me some sense of something good. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing it, you know. So I don't know. I guess what I'm trying to say is if you are alexithymic, you might really need to explore what the hell is going on in your head, and really sit down and figure it out, because you might surprise yourself and discover there's all kinds of stuff going on that you would never have thought, because you've kind of got to manually go through the process of discovery, like I guess I have over the last year or so. When I get back to Ireland in September, October, I am going to go back to Temple Bar. And I know that it's not going to be the Guinness that does it. And I know it's not necessarily even the music. I know it's going to be all those people from all over the world that swoop into that location in excitement and, like joy that they're traveling and they're seeing the world. And I'm just going to sit there like that vampire on What We Do in the Shadows and just absorb all of that positive energy, just take it all in and, head back to my hotel in a positive frame of mind for the first time probably in weeks or months. So that's my plan. Anyway, it is 8 o'clock. My head is hurting. My daughter's downstairs, hopefully starting to get ready for bed, so I better go and check on her. I do apologize for not being able to take any questions. I just don't think I've got the energy for it. I'm just too headache fatigued. And like I said, I've got to go and check on the little one. Oh, she's not even little anymore. She's 10. Um, but yeah, so I'm going to go now. But thank you very much for everyone that made it. I will, of course, be making this recording available. Hold on. Oh God, yeah, I am recording. Thank God for that. I had a moment there. I'm going to make this recording available as fast as I can, when the time comes on my YouTube channel. If you're not subscribed to my YouTube channel, please do. YouTube is by far my most depressing social media excursion. I don't know if anyone else here uses social media as a kind of job sort of thing, but YouTube is an absolute horror. It's so difficult to get YouTube to kind of catch on. Like Instagram and Facebook are relatively easy. All I have to do there apparently is post pictures of bears, and people are happy. But on YouTube, it's like pulling teeth. So so please do subscribe and watch a few of my videos. I've put a lot of stuff on there over the years, about all this stuff. So I'd like to think it's a relatively useful resource, to please do make use of it. It's all free, obviously. So knock yourselves out. But yeah, thanks everyone. Try and make it if you can to some of my other sessions that I do. Feel free. I will be doing other free ones. The reason that, look, honestly, the reason that I started charging £2 for this one about autism and ADHD is the rent will be due around that time. I've got to try and make a living. So, please don't hold that against me. I'm only a human being, and being a writer is not the most kind of lucrative life. The actual writing aspect is not, that's not where the big money is, unless you're like Richard Osman or someone like that. So yeah, do consider coming along to that. But anyway, have a good evening. I will see you, hopefully some of you again soon, and have a good evening. And yes, enjoy Malaysia and Finland and Germany and Sleaford and all those places that you are from. So bye, everybody. Cheers. I'll stop recording.